Hey, my name is Will. When I was a kid, I really enjoyed playing the Wario Land series. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my experiences with the Wario Land games because they're something that I think everyone should experience. But also because Nintendo hasn't given us a new Wario Land game in over 15 years, so there's that as well. I'm also going to talk about something that I have been really happy to see, and that's the rise of a whole new genre, the Wario-like genre. So kick back, relax, crack open a jar of your favorite garlic, and let me share memories of one of my favorite series with you. So let's start by going back in time to the original Game Boy and the first game in the series, Wario Land. Super Mario Land 3. Okay, that was a bit of a mouthful. But yes, that was the official title of the first Wario Land game, and was the first game where Wario was a playable character. As a kid growing up in the 90s, the Mario games I had played were the original trilogy on the NES and Super Mario World on the Super Nintendo. At the time, these were the only Mario games I knew existed. One day, my uncle was visiting and he had something with him. It was this grey, brick-looking thing with buttons that looked like an NES controller. It was the original Game Boy and he had Tetris and Mario Land on it. I was wowed that there was this thing I could hold in my hands and play games on instead of a TV. The important thing here though is that Mario Land got me thinking, man, what if there are Mario games out there that I'm not aware of? So from then on, me and my brother were always looking for new Mario games. Something that did bite us a couple times when renting games. Ugh, oh man, I am not going to talk about the time we rented Mario's Time Machine. Anyway, the next Mario experience for us was when we got a Super Nintendo with Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Yes, that is the title of the first Yoshi game. Are you seeing a pattern with the naming conventions yet? I did eventually get a Game Boy Color with Pokemon Red. I sunk so much time into that game, but eventually I wanted something new. So one day at a local flea market, there was a stall selling used Game Boy games, and a certain game caught our attention. The game was labeled Super Mario Land 3. I remember being in awe because I had no idea that this existed. So we bought the game, and when we got home, we started playing and noticed something strange. Instead of Mario, I was playing as this big, crazy-looking guy. And that was my first impression of Wario. I thought that he looked crazy, like when someone gets hit by a mallet in a cartoon and has stars around their eyes. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this story is to show you the reason why Nintendo called the first Wario game Super Mario Land 3. When it came to completely new games, Nintendo in that era would often piggyback off a more successful series to raise awareness for a new game, and try to make sure that the game sold well. In the Mario series especially, this was common practice. In Japan, Super Mario World had the footnote of Super Mario Bros. 4, so that it made the connection to the success of the series on the NES. The first Yoshi game had Super Mario World 2 in its title, so that it would make a connection to the success of Super Mario World. And of course, the first Wario game had Super Mario Land in its title, so that it could make a connection to the success of Super Mario Land on the Game Boy. With Yoshi's Island, there was a bit of a confusion initially with Mario being a baby and all, but eventually we just chalked it up to the game being a prequel, and we didn't really think about it too much as it featured Mario and Yoshi. But the game itself? Looking back on it now, the only thing it shared with Super Mario World was the characters and the fact that it was a platformer. With Super Mario Land 3, I remember being really confused. I remember questioning if the game was even real. It had a character I had never heard of before or seen mentioned in any of the other Mario games I had played. But those feelings of confusion faded into the background as I got further into the game. This game was a lot of fun, and compared to what I had experienced with Super Mario Land, this game was insanely detailed by comparison. It might be funny to say that now, but when you put the two side by side, you can see how it would have wowed me. It quickly changed from me wanting a new Mario game to me wanting a new Wario game. I just wanted to see more of this ridiculous character and his treasure hunting antics. In Wario Land, the story is that Wario failed ousting Mario from his castle in the previous game, and comes up with a plan to steal a statue of Princess Peach from a pirate named Captain Syrup, so that he can buy himself the castle of his dreams. The whole game is about collecting treasure that further fuels this goal. In terms of gameplay, it's very different to the other games in the Wario Land series. I think at the time, Nintendo was trying to make the gameplay similar to what Mario Land 2 was. At its core, the game shares very similar gameplay to Mario Land. This is also one of the two Wario games where you shrink to a smaller size when damaged. That was something that was removed later. Though similar to Mario Land, the game does have its own identity because of Wario's character design. Wario just has this unhinged look to him, and it's reflected really well in the gameplay. He does things like charge at enemies like a crazed bull, but also just straight up charge through the level itself. It's this gameplay that got me hooked as a kid. Every stage had me ramming things to see if they would break. But aside from that, the game stays pretty true to what Wario Land did. You have 7 worlds to visit, including Rice Beach, Mount Teapot, Sherbet Land, Stove Canyon, the SS Teacup, Parsley Woods, and the grand finale at Syrup Castle. The soundtrack to the game fits Wario's personality really well. It just has this quality to it that makes it sound perfect for a cartoon villain who's hunting treasure. Another thing that's great about this game is that it offers replay value by having multiple endings. Depending on how many treasures you found and how much money you end up with, it determines the final reward for Wario. The one thing I'll say about this game that may not have aged as well when compared to the other games in the series is that the gameplay feels a lot slower in terms of pacing. It's still worth checking out as it's a bridge between the end of Mario Land and the beginning of Wario Land. It's just definitely going to feel like the odd one out when you compare it to what followed. Next in the Wario Land series is an entry that a lot of people did not get a chance to play, including myself. The reason being that it was released on a doomed console that didn't get a release outside of Japan and America. So this topic deserves its own video, but I'll keep it brief as there are numerous excellent videos that talk about this part of Nintendo's history. In 1995, Nintendo released a new portable console called the Virtual Boy. Its main feature was that it could display stereoscopic 3D visuals, something that at the time was new to a portable device. Okay, I use the word portable loosely here because the way this device was intended to be used, well, it was far from convenient. The Virtual Boy was a failure, so much so that I didn't even know this thing existed until way later on. It turns out Nintendo cut their losses and did not end up releasing the Virtual Boy in Europe or Australia. In fact, it was only on the market for about a year. So yeah, no wonder. Though it was a failure, the Virtual Boy did have a Wario Land game released on it, but sadly it hasn't been brought over to something like the Virtual Console or Nintendo's online service. I thought for sure that since the 3DS had 3D capabilities, we would see a re-release of these lost games, but that never happened. I think the reason is for this game to be re-released, it would mean Nintendo acknowledging and drawing attention to one of their biggest failures, which I don't think they'll ever want to do. It's a shame because the game is really decent, despite the platform it's on. Thankfully, thanks to emulation, there is an unofficial way to play this on a 3DS, with the 3D effects fully intact. So this game is more of a sequel to Wario Land compared to the other entries because it shares the same gameplay loop. It's closer to Mario Land in terms of gameplay as well, but takes one step closer to modern Wario by having ridiculous looking enemies all throughout the game. The game itself is fairly short. There's only 14 stages, but each of the stages has a lot of detail behind the 3D visuals. There's a nice mix of environments including caves, forests, lakes, deserts, ghost houses, forges, and ancient temples. Each of these environments have nice parallax effects and really pop on the 3DS. The footage here really doesn't do it justice, and I was just really impressed by how nice everything looks for something that predated the 3DS by over a decade. Despite the painful choice of color, which you can thankfully change via the emulator, the characters and environments look super detailed when compared to the visuals the Game Boy had. If I would have seen this as a kid, my mind would have been blown for sure. Outside of the 3D visuals, I think the coolest thing about this game is that there was this concept of combining powers. If Wario picks up either the Eagle or Dragon power-up and then acquires the other, the two combine and become the King Dragon power-up, which gives Wario both the power of flight and a new fireball attack that pierces enemies and certain blocks. It's a really cool idea, and I wish it was something that was played around with more. But sadly, this is the only combination power in the game, and the idea wasn't explored any further as the core gameplay was about to change in the next game. Speaking of next game, let's jump to Wario Land 2. Wario Land 2 was released in the West in 1999. Since Wario Land did really well, this time around Nintendo didn't put Mario Land anywhere in the title. My experience with Wario Land 2 as a kid was great. It was the first game that we owned that was optimized for the Game Boy Color. Up until that point, all the games we had were older Game Boy games. The Game Boy Color had a feature that would add color to older games, but it was usually a choice of preset color palettes that sometimes had far from optimal results. So there was a sense of wow initially when I got to see the Game Boy Color at its full potential for the first time. I can see how it might be weird to say that. At the time, I was really happy to see these visuals on the Game Boy. Wario Land 2 was the game that truly sold me on Wario as a character, and it was also where the foundations of the series as we now know it were laid. The game's story is that Captain Syrup has returned. She sneaks into Wario's castle, steals his treasure, floods his castle, and worst of all, sets off his alarm so he can't sleep in. The plot to this game is just straight up out of a cartoon show, and I love it for that. This is the game where Wario Land gained its full identity and truly split from Mario Land. It introduced several things from both a visual and gameplay perspective that made it truly differ from Mario games. For example, Wario no longer has a weaker form like Mario. In Wario Land 2, Wario is knocked back when damaged and instead will lose some of his precious coins. Additionally, the game doesn't have a concept of losing a life. Instead, most of the time the biggest penalty is losing coins or having to redo a platforming section. It's a system that's pretty forgiving for new players, but also doesn't make the game easy by any means. Boss fights also operate in the same manner, where if Wario takes a hit or falls in a pit, it just means Wario has to shake it off and try again. I think this all suits Wario's character pretty well, as I always saw Wario as a juggernaut when compared to Mario. It also adds to the comedy of the game because when Wario takes damage, it's done in a pretty cartoonish manner. But I think the thing that made me fall in love with the series and the character was how upgrades were treated. In Mario games, Mario hits a block, an item pops out, and gives Mario a new suit or power. The original Wario Land worked in this way as well, which was fine, but it wasn't unique. So how do you implement something new without it being a carbon copy of Mario? The solution was simple and brilliant. In Wario Land 2, the way Wario overcomes obstacles is not by picking up an item and using it. Instead, Wario falls victim to some unfortunate circumstance that in most cases injures him, but then you take advantage of this bad situation and make something of it. This game is pretty much making lemonade out of lemons. Wario gets lit on fire, has allergic reactions to bee stings, becomes obese by being fed donuts, and yet despite the horrible things that happen to his body, you are able to use these things to your advantage and progress on your quest to get more treasure. To me, it felt like Wario Land 2 was a game that, at its core, says, you know what? It's okay to make mistakes. Laugh at them. Have fun. And who knows, maybe something good might come from that mistake. Just get up and try again. It'll be fine. The game has a more cartoonish vibe as a result, and it's great. When I was playing through it again recently, there were moments that got me laughing as I just remembered how absurd the game was at times. Like the side story where you have to rescue Wario's prized hen. It was something that I had completely forgotten about until I saw it again. The whole level is ridiculous, and it's something that just highlights how great this series can be. So when I played through the game as a kid, I found it weird that the game had no world map like the previous game. You would go from one stage to the next and be shown a little cutscene every now and then. So I remember getting to the end of the game thinking, okay, that was fun, but it felt a bit shorter than the previous game. But then when the credits finish rolling, the game reveals that the game is broken up into branching paths with multiple endings. This was such a cool thing, and I remember being eager to find the multiple paths. The first thing I remember noticing was that the first stage had an alternate path. I must have tried to break down every wall in the stage and search from top to bottom to no avail. I remember I was about to give up when something clicked. At the start of the stage, Wario gets woken up by his alarm and you get out of bed and start the stage. So I decided to take a page out of real life and see what would happen if I ignored the alarm. And sure enough, the stage ends and you are taken down the path of an alternate story where Wario doesn't bother to wake up that day. It was so great and it still makes me smile whenever I play this alternate path. The only thing I'll say about this game is that though it's not difficult overall, there are times where the level design has very cheap moments that are designed to set you back constantly, especially the grand finale that you get for unlocking all the treasure. That stage can be frustrating. The game is something that I still think holds up pretty well today, and it's worth a visit to see the game that set the standard on how future Wario Land games would work. So now let's move on to the next game in the series. It's Wario Land 3 for the Game Boy Color. So Wario Land 3 released in the year 2000. And to be honest, it was a game that I don't really remember hearing about. Not really sure why that's the case. It was a title that I didn't know of until I learnt about Wario Land 4. I was like, wait a minute, there was a Wario Land 3? Anyway, I did manage to get a copy of the game later on thanks to a random flea market visit. But I'll admit I only got to play it for the first time recently. Better late than never, I guess. Wario Land 3 is a sequel in every sense of the word to Wario Land 2. It keeps all the mechanics from 2, but what sets Wario Land 3 apart from its predecessor is that the world map makes a return, but with the twist that there is a day and night cycle where stages alter based on the time of day. Each stage has 4 treasure chests that can be opened by finding the corresponding colored key somewhere in the world. In most cases, the first time you visit a stage, you will only be able to get 1 treasure. What makes the game interesting is, as you progress the game, you might acquire a treasure from a chest that will cause an event to happen on the world map. This event will either open up a new stage, or will alter an existing stage to have something new to discover. It's a pretty fun system and gives incentive to want to find everything and see what the world has to offer. The game still has all the cartoony vibes with the story. This time around, Wario is being promised treasures and riches by helping out an ominous genie. Wario is still getting injured in pretty hilarious ways to progress stages. Boss fights once again involve Wario getting himself out of some ridiculous situation without the risk of death. To mix things up this time though, Wario doesn't start with his full arsenal of abilities and instead has to unlock them by finding certain items in the stages. Though a cool idea, at the start it was a bit jarring because in Wario Land 2 you had all these abilities from the get-go. It would have been nice to see some new abilities or enhanced abilities instead of taking away the standard ones and making you earn them again, but oh well. The world is divided into 4 main areas and each area has a set of stages and a boss. The game culminates in one final battle with the genie who of course double-crosses Wario and intends to imprison him to be able to become free once again. It's a pretty straightforward fight, though the one thing I will say is it's the only part of the game that will give you a game over. I found this to be really strange given the rest of the game follows the same logic as Wario Land 2 where there is no such thing as lives and you just simply get knocked out of the arena and try again. Since it did take a few attempts to get this fight down, I did have to sit through the dialogue multiple times as the game just didn't let you jump back into the fight again. Anyway, Wario Land 3 is a great game. It built upon what was done in Wario Land 2 and added a layer of depth that was pretty cool to see for a Game Boy game. Though nostalgia makes me love Wario Land 2 more, if I was to recommend the series to anyone, I would say play 3 first, then 2. Thankfully, these games don't have continuity, so you can play them in whatever order you want. I think it makes sense to play a game where you earn Wario's abilities first, and then a game where you have them all from the start second. Alright, it's time to move on to a new system and a new Wario Land game. Wario Land 4 for the Game Boy Advance. Wario Land 4 was a game that I really wanted to play back when it was released in 2001. But sadly, I didn't own a Game Boy Advance at the time, so it never happened. So in 2023, I decided to change that and got to play it for the first time. The game is a much nicer looking game than its predecessors and keeps all the gameplay that I knew and loved. The main difference in Wario Land 4 is that this time the stage follows a flow where you must collect treasures, reach the end goal, and then have to run back to the start of the stage via a new path before the time runs out. It's a pretty neat addition and goes well with Wario's revised charge ability. It's great and adds to the whole fantasy of playing this juggernaut character. You can now just charge through whole screens and take out anything in your path. And that's all I'll say on the gameplay loop for now, as this is a topic I'm going to come back to later on in the video. Wario Land 4 is a straightforward experience. This time around, Wario reads an article about a legendary treasure in a pyramid, so he decides to go steal the treasure. Only he ends up in a quest to rescue a princess instead by mistake. The game is pretty linear when compared to Wario Land 2 and 3, as it doesn't offer any alternate paths. The game is split into 6 areas, and though it is fairly simple in structure when compared to Wario Land 3, the game makes up for it with its level designs, improved graphics, and Wario now having voice acting, which I love by the way. There is also a collection of WarioWare-like minigames that you can play to earn items, to help you with bosses, and if you love WarioWare, you'll love these. What I like the most about this game is just how much of a nostalgia hit it is. All the powers I know and love are here and have new animations. We also hear Wario's voice a lot more now, and that just makes the game so much more fun. The only other change that's of note here is that Wario has a health bar and isn't the unstoppable juggernaut he was in previous entries. But he has enough of a health bar that it really won't matter until boss fights. I also love how strange and ridiculous the game gets with its level and sound design. Some of these stages have really strange music. Take this stage for example. I was not expecting someone to be singing in the background, and though it was strange, it wasn't strange for Wario Land. Also, the bonus areas where you have to solve a puzzle to get treasure are fantastic. Some of them are platforming challenges, and others you have to bully this old man and use him to solve the puzzle. It's absurd and it's great. The level variety here is Wario Land at its best. You have the standard platforming levels, which are always fun, but then you have these levels that are pretty ridiculous in premise, and as a result are just so much fun to play. The 2 stages that stand out for me are the stage where Wario has to race dominoes that he himself toppled over to unlock a barrier at the end of the room. and the stage where Wario has to roll a dice in this weird board game to get things to happen in the stage. Both are very memorable and are a reason why this game is pretty cool. I won't say much more about the game as I'm going to bring it up later on, but yeah, if you haven't played this one, it's a must. It's pretty short when compared to Wario Land 3, but it's a very fun experience. Alright, so before we get to the final game in the Wario Land series, there are two other games I want to talk about first, even if they are considered spin-offs. They have enough of a Wario Land vibe to them that they're worth talking about. But before we do that, I want to quickly say thanks for sticking with me so far. I do hope you're enjoying the video, and if you want to see me play through any of these games, you can find my full playthroughs of the games and more over on my Stream Archive channel. There's a link in the description or pinned comment if you're curious. Anyway, let's talk about Wario World for the GameCube. Wario World was released in 2003, so this is a game I got to check out for the first time in 2023, as the GameCube wasn't something I owned until recently. Wario World is the game that brought Wario to the world of 3D platforming. And for Wario's first 3D entry, it's pretty good. The game has great music, and there are a lot of Wario voice lines in this one. It made me smile a lot. So in this game, Wario's just chilling in his castle with all his riches, when one of his many treasures comes to life, takes over the castle, and turns his treasures into enemies. You visit 4 worlds, each with 2 stages and a boss, and 1 final boss at the end. This is the biggest critique of this game. It's really short. If you go for 100% completion, each stage has enough to do that will make the game last a bit longer. But if you go for the bare minimum approach, it's a game that you can get through very quickly. The game is like other Wario games where the ending is affected by how good your treasure collecting skills are. The stages and the gameplay are a lot of fun in this one. Wario engages in a lot of hand-to-hand combat by punching, spinning, throwing, and pounding enemies into oblivion. It did make me smile a lot when Wario would beat the living crap out of something and then say, "Excellent!" But when everything was said and done, though I had a lot of fun, the game had me wanting more. Aside from its short duration, I think the game has a bit of a lack of identity. What I mean by this is when Wario Land for the Game Boy released, Nintendo hadn't fleshed out what a Wario game was, and so its identity was defined by the Mario Land games. With Wario World, I feel like this is the same case. You can see no better example of this than in the sub-areas. Some of the sub-areas are a platforming challenge that is highly reminiscent of what you would get in Mario Sunshine. To the credit of Wario World, these sections played out a lot better for me than they did in Sunshine. In Sunshine, I found myself struggling with some of these areas, and it was often because of FLUDD or just sliding off obstacles. But the thing is, as more refined as these sections were, they didn't really do anything unique in the sense that would make me say that 3D Wario had its own identity. You could play as Mario in these challenges and there wouldn't be too much of a difference for how they would play out. And that's my opinion really for the game as a whole. It's really cool to have Wario in a 3D world, but as far as the gameplay goes, it's missing that flair and personality that the 2D games established. I'm talking about the ridiculous power-ups, injuries, and environmental challenges. Though Wario is able to break stuff in this game, it's usually things that look fragile to begin with, which is okay, but it's not like the earlier games where you have a wall that looks perfectly fine and then Wario is just able to barrel through it to discover a secret. The sub-areas in this game are all clearly marked and most aren't well hidden, which is a shame. The standard enemies in Wario World also kind of blend in with one another. You just beat the crap out of them and yeah, that's it. There are some circumstances where you get to spin enemies around to be able to progress through the stage. More stuff like that involves Wario injuring or being injured to overcome an obstacle would have gone a long way. To be fair to the game, the boss fights are great fun and they do fit well with the kind of bosses that appear throughout the series. But everything else, I don't know. It feels like it's missing the charm of what was established in the Game Boy games. This is why I say this game feels like how the original Wario Land felt for me. Both are fun games. I really enjoyed my time with them, but they don't seem to have a fully established identity. Wario Land has the benefit of being the first game in the series, so you can't really fault it for that. But Wario World? I think a couple of transformations for Wario and having secret areas that weren't just highlighted on the ground would have made this game feel much more at home with the other Wario games. The game is definitely worth playing. You will have fun with it, but if you're like me, you'll definitely be left with wanting more from it at the end. Okay, so let's move on to the other spin-off game in the series, and that's Wario Master of Disguise. The Master of Disguise is a game released on the original Nintendo DS in 2007. It's the only Wario game to be released during the DS and 3DS era that wasn't a WarioWare release. So this was another game that I didn't even know existed until way later on. So my first playthrough of this game was in 2024 for the sake of discussion in this video. Master of Disguise is a game that I think may have confused people back in the day that were a fan of the Wario Land series. Reason being is the gameplay loop in this one is very different compared to any of the other Wario games. For starters, Master of Disguise has a much more heavy focus on story than any of the other Wario games. There's a lot of reading on this one, to the point where it feels like an RPG. It's not a bad thing. I enjoy RPGs a lot, and the story of this game was something that I did enjoy overall. It's just definitely something I wasn't expecting going into the game blind. The same goes for the pace of the platforming. The gameplay is a lot slower than other Wario games. You aren't barreling through stages, and instead are approaching stages in a more explorative manner. Again, nothing wrong with it, it's just different. So for those of you who haven't played this one, and want to check out all the games in the series, this game is very different. It's from the era where gameplay for DS games happened on the bottom screen primarily, so the controls heavily gravitate towards the touchscreen, which was always a bit of a double-edged sword for DS games. So the story is Wario makes a device that lets him enter a TV show about a master thief named Cannoli, who has a magical rod that disguises him. So Wario crashes in on his party, takes his rod, and becomes the Purple Wind. He learns of a tablet with the ability to grant wishes, but was broken up into fragments. So Wario begins a quest to collect gems to power up his new rod companion and collect the pieces of the tablet. It's a pretty fun story, and Wario's personality shines all the way throughout. The stages are divided into chapters of a story, so you get to visit many different places, gain new powers through costumes, and play a bunch of WarioWare-like minigames to unlock the treasure chests you find in the stages. The stages themselves also have a lot of moments that made me laugh. My favorite stage was the stage where you just come across some muscular dolphins. Yes, that's right, muscular dolphins. This is Wario weirdness at its finest. But let's talk about how the game plays and what made me torn on this game. So Wario in this game has completely new transformations via costumes. Every Wario costume is unique, and it was great to finally see some new Wario abilities. It's something that I felt was missing from Wario Land 4 and Wario World, so messing around with all these new costumes was definitely great. But the problem I have with this game is that it can just be super clunky at times. So the game fully leans into the touchscreen. You control Wario with either the D-pad or the XYBA buttons, and then keep a stylus in your dominant hand. In order to swap costumes, you must draw a symbol that corresponds to the costume. Seems simple enough, but there were a lot of times that changing costumes became a chore. And here's why. You also use the touchscreen to attack. There were a lot of times where I was trying to transform into a new costume, and instead of registering a symbol, it would cause me to use the ability of my current costume. This was especially the case with Art Wario, where you have to draw to summon objects. I'd want to change costumes, but then it would register it as me trying to summon something. To the game's credit though, the pacing of the platforming and combat was slowed down enough so that there is enough time to be able to reasonably swap with time for error. But there were definitely certain parts of the game where I was yelling like a madman. And then...
Yes, keep throwing the shit. Don't give the heart right away even though you draw them. Yes.
Okay, that was not a heart. I'll accept that wasn't a heart. Or that one. I did play this on the 3DS, so maybe that could have been the reason for some of the jank I was experiencing. But jank aside, much like a lot of the games from the Wii and early DS, gimmick fatigue eventually kicked in for me. I did enjoy my time with Master of Disguise overall. It was a fun story, and seeing new powers for Wario was something that my inner child was really happy to see. The game is worth a look for sure, but I'm just not sure the game has aged as well as some of the others. Alright, and here we are at the final game in the Wario Land series. This game was released for the Wii in 2008, and it was a title that I was really looking forward to when it got announced. Though here in Australia, it was known as Wario Land: The Shake Dimension for some reason. I'm going to be referring to it as Wario Land Shake It from here on out. The game has a hand-drawn art style that looked amazing at the time and added to the level of charm that I loved the Wario Land series for. Everything looked really fluid and great, so I made sure to get my copy on day one. So how did my first playthrough go? Well, I had a lot of fun with it. The game is vibrant, colorful, and still had all the things I loved about the series. The animations were all amazing, and it gave us one of the greatest level select screens in any Nintendo game.
Oh yes, look at my booty. Look at it, it's glorious. Yes!
So this time around, Wario is helping these tiny creatures to rescue their queen from the tyrant, the Shake King, all for the reward of a legendary bottomless coin sack. Another Saturday morning cartoon plot, but this is why I love these games. The game is split over 5 areas, with each area having a boss, and also one final showdown with the Shake King at the very end. There are a lot of nice looking levels in this game, with the standouts for me being the jungle, casino, and mana stages. Each stage looks amazing in its presentation, and I think this game would be incredible if they could somehow remaster it for a full HD presentation. At the time, I was really happy with my time with the game, but here's the thing. Can I say it was an excellent game when compared to the other games in the series? Not really. So here's the biggest problem with Wario Land Shake It. The game is great with its art style and charm, but its biggest issue for me is that the game was released in an era of gaming where a lot of games fell flat for me. I'm talking about the Wii era of gaming. Okay, so quick recap. The Wii released in late 2006 to critical acclaim. It was the console that everyone was talking about with its new way to play games with motion controls. Though motion controls had been around for a while, this was the first time they were being used on such a large scale. When the Wii launched, I was hooked on the games that released on it. I thought some of the motion controls were great and enhanced a lot of games. I have a lot of great memories of my time with that console for sure. But okay, then why am I making the Wii era sound bad then? Well, the Wii era had one big problem for me. As time progressed, I got tired of motion controls. It felt like developers got a bit carried away and just added motion controls for the sake of adding them. The best example is looking at the main menu designs for most of the games from this era. They require you to point the Wiimote at the TV and use the hand like a mouse cursor, which got tedious, when they could have just made them simple button presses. So Wario Land Shake It, in my opinion, suffered from this need to use motion controls. Some are fine and fit pretty seamlessly into the gameplay, but then there are others which just feel forced. Like take Wario's Earth Shake attack or swinging actions. You have to shake the Wiimote to use either of these abilities, and it's something that gets old pretty quick. When you throw enemies as well, you have to use tilt controls to aim, which can be non-ideal sometimes. The issue for me came down to this. The way you hold the Wiimote in this game is in a horizontal orientation, so when you have to perform any of these motion gestures, it just feels awkward. I get that the title of the game had Shake It, but I would have been perfectly happy with the shake aspect just being the parts where you grab bags of money or enemies to shake them. That would have been more than enough, and I probably wouldn't have felt the gimmick fatigue at all. But I mean, even with the money bag aspect, after a while I was asking myself, why is Wario doing this? When you shake the bags of money, the coins explode out of the bags and just go everywhere. And sometimes they just fall into pits or are spread across the stage far enough that you can't get all the coins before they vanish. So follow the logic here on what Wario does. He shakes the bag of money to have the money go everywhere. Then he frantically picks up the money, most likely losing some in the process, and then goes to store the money in his pockets, most likely? It's a bag of money. Just take the whole bag with you. I don't know. The gimmick of the game just didn't do it for me. I really liked the stages and the design of the game overall, but a lot of the time I was just wishing that the game was just a Wario Land game with no motion controls at all. I'm sure I wasn't alone in this, as at the time this was probably when the first feelings of gimmick fatigue for Wii games in general were starting to kick in for most people. I still like the game overall, but it's kinda sad that this is the last time we would hear from the Wario Land series. The game was released in 2008, so at the time of the making of this video, it's been over 15 years and we still haven't had anything new from the Wario Land series. As it stands now, the only Wario game that is releasing on a pretty regular basis is WarioWare, which is a great series by the way. But at one of the Nintendo Directs in 2023, there was a moment where Wario came up on the screen for a second and I was excited. We already had a WarioWare game on the Switch, so to see Wario pop up on the screen again made me think we were getting a new game in the Wario Land series. But no, it was another WarioWare game with motion controls. Oh man, the irony. But now we come to the part of this video where I talk about something that I have been really happy to see, and that's the rise of a new genre. A genre that has finally filled in the void of this 15-year gap where we haven't had anything new in terms of Wario Land. This is the rise of the Wario-like. What is a Wario-like, you ask? Well, I think the best way to talk about this is to jump into one of my favorite releases of 2023, Pizza Tower. You ever have something pop up that you didn't know how much you wanted it until you finally got your hands on it? That's Pizza Tower for me. If I could sum up Pizza Tower in one sentence, it would be this. This is the Wario Land game that I've wanted Nintendo to do for a very long time. Pizza Tower is its own game. It stands on its own 2 feet and marks the return of one of my favorite style of games. I say it's the Wario Land game I've always wanted because this is what I wanted Wario Land 4, Wario Land Shake It, or any new game in the series to be. A gimmick-free, cartoony platformer with new powers that just feel great to play. See, as much as I love the format that Wario Land followed, one thing I always wanted was new transformations. New ways for Wario to injure himself and somehow take advantage of the absurdity to further progress the stage. The games didn't really do this. The only time we got to see Wario do new things was in Master of Disguise, which was fun, but it's not quite what I had in mind. Pizza Tower fulfills this wish and so much more, but we will get to that shortly. So let's start at the beginning. The plot of this game is that you play as Peppino, owner of a struggling pizzeria who needs to save his business from the threat of a giant laser that is being fired by a sentient pizza face. Ridiculous, but I love it. Peppino has moves that are similar to Wario's moveset, but with other additions that make the gameplay feel more fluid. He can climb walls, slide, uppercut, and do a move that is very reminiscent of the super jump in the Metroid series. There's also a taunt ability that can be used to clear the screen of enemies once a large enough combo has been reached. The stages are very reminiscent of Wario Land 4, where you run through a stage, encounter a few bonus areas along the way, and then trigger an event where you have to run back to the start of the stage to escape it. The game draws a lot of its inspiration from Wario Land 4, with the exception being Peppino is an unstoppable juggernaut rather than having health. But where the game really shines is in the pacing of the gameplay. Though Wario Land 4 had escape sequences, for me it felt like you had more than enough time. Even with a countdown to doom, it didn't ever feel like the stages had an elevated level of stakes during the end sequence. With Pizza Tower, the game encourages you to barrel through the stages as fast as you can, and the escape sequences increase the stakes by having a smaller window of escape and then also having Pizza Face turn up and chase you if you go into overtime. As a result, each stage ends up being a frantic, high-paced experience during the escape sequences, and they all have been designed in a way that you can just flow from one room to another if you learn the stage enough. The game rewards you with a ranking based on how well you did, and it makes you want to do better, and that's where the replay value for this game lies. In Wario Land 4, it felt like there wasn't really any incentive for escaping a stage in a timely or impressive manner. In most stages, you would have gotten most of the treasure on your way through the stage, so the escape sequence, in most cases, kinda fell flat. Pizza Tower's ranking system makes you want to chase a better rank, and adds a mechanic for the highest rank that is honestly such a rush to achieve. The P rank in this game is just a great system for replay value. It's completely optional, it doesn't alter the core experience, but for those that love the rush of barreling through stages, the chase of the P rank is just amazing. So, to achieve a P rank in a stage, it involves the process of maintaining your combo meter all throughout the stage, collecting the pizza toppings, find all the bonus areas, and the secret collectible. Then, during the escape sequence, you must complete a second lap of the escape sequence before the time runs out. Whilst this might sound complex and insanely hard, it's not as bad as you would think. I was initially put off with the idea because holding a combo throughout the whole stage seemed tedious, but it's actually super lenient. As long as you collect an item or attack an enemy, your combo meter will not drop. And it takes longer than you would think to lose combo. The stages are all really well crafted to make sure that at any given point there is something to help you maintain combo with enough wiggle room. So it just becomes a case of familiarizing yourself with the stage and run through it as best as you can and avoid major stalling. It definitely takes skill, but it's more doable than you would think, and it's an amazing rush once you finally get it done. So now onto the stages themselves. Each stage is very memorable, and much like Wario Land 4, the stages are fun platforming experiences. But then stages often have areas or themes that are dedicated to unique and fun mechanics. I won't go over all of them, but my favorite stages in Pizza Tower were War, where you have to stop a bomb from exploding as quick as you can whilst armed with a shotgun. Golf, where you play a game of golf whilst finishing the stage. And Don't Make a Sound, where you have to escape a child-oriented pizzeria with animatronic monsters lurking around. Every stage has a unique Peppino weapon or transformation, so from start to finish, this game just put a smile on my face. It's what I wanted Wario Land to do for such a long time. The art style is fantastic, and it takes me back to some of the cartoons I grew up with, particularly of the Nicktoons era from the 90s and early 2000s. The animations are all fluid, and I just love how frantic Peppino looks as he barrels through stages, desperately trying to save his pizzeria. The soundtrack? The soundtrack to this game is a jam. Every stage has a memorable tune, and is capped off with the escape sequence music being an intense track that gets even more intense if you opt into chasing those S and P ranks. Pretty much every song I've featured in this video is a favorite of mine, and the rest of the soundtrack is equally good. The game quickly became one of my favorite releases of 2023. And it's now also become a game that I'm hoping will continue into the future with more content or more games. It's seriously that good. And if you're a fan of Wario Land games and miss them as much as I have, you don't have to wait around anymore. Pizza Tower is leading the charge with this new genre of games that are inspired by Wario Land. So the rest of this video isn't spent on talking about Pizza Tower, let's talk about another Wario-like game that I'm excited for. And that game is ANTONBLAST. So at the time of the making of this video, ANTONBLAST is still in development. But I have played the 2023 demo and figured there was enough to talk about here. I think this is a game that I'm going to love just as much as Pizza Tower. So, ANTONBLAST features a gruff-looking, bearded man that perfectly fits the bill for someone I would expect to barrel through a stage at top speeds. ANTONBLAST draws a visual style that is much closer to Wario Land 4 than Pizza Tower, and features a gameplay loop that is much more true to Wario Land 4. ANTONBLAST feels like a true spiritual successor to Wario Land 4. It looks like it's going to take what I loved about Wario Land 4, but present it in a much more detailed and expanded way than the original ever did. At least, I think so anyway. Again, the demo is the only thing I could play at the time of the making of this video, but this is my gut feeling on it. The twist on the gameplay is that Anton's charge ability is backed up by a mechanic that is kind of hard to explain until you try it in-game. It's a boost mechanic that works pretty similar to how boosting worked in Crash Team Racing, if you've ever played that. You get rewarded for tapping the button at the correct time and can move faster as a result. It makes for some pretty fun moments when chaining this ability correctly. What I love about this game as well is that it's bringing back something that otherwise would have been lost to time in terms of the Wario Land series. In Virtual Boy Wario Land, one of the cool things you could do was jump between the background and foreground in platforming. It was a pretty neat idea, but they didn't really do anything with it beyond that game. ANTONBLAST embraces this idea, but also expands on it by having other obstacles in the stages use this sense of depth. It's this sort of thing that really makes me excited to see what else this game will have to offer. The game just seems like a big love letter to the series as a whole, which I'm all for. I would love to talk about ANTONBLAST as much as I did with Pizza Tower, but again, at the time of the making of this video, the demo was the only thing playable. The only other thing I'll say is I hope they find a good voice for Anton, something as memorable as Wario. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane of Wario Land games, as well as a look at a couple of the games that are leading the charge to not only fill the gap that Nintendo has left, but being the start of something I hope will become a genre of game in its own right. Pizza Tower launched to success and a cult following. It has a very dedicated fan base, and we're already seeing fan games pop up that are taking the game to new levels. I have no doubt that ANTONBLAST will launch to a similar success, and will be a day one buy for me as well. Much like Wario Land played a massive role in inspiring people to make games, Pizza Tower and ANTONBLAST will definitely do the same one day. These are the only two games that I'm currently aware of that are either finished or close to being finished, but it would not surprise me if there are others. So hey, if you know of any other Wario likes or have some fun memories of Wario Land, be sure to share in the comments. Who knows, maybe Nintendo might blow the dust off the Wario Land series and finally give us a new game. It's been over 15 years now, and there's never been a better time to do so. But honestly, when it comes to this style of game, Nintendo may have pioneered it with Wario Land, but now the torch has definitely been passed on, and it couldn't be in better hands. So yeah, I hope this video got you thinking about the Wario Land series if you haven't given these games a go. If you haven't given some of these games a go, they are a lot of fun and I highly recommend them. Let me know what your favorite game in the series is in the comments, and be sure to let me know if you enjoyed the video, as that'll let me know to keep doing more. But in the meantime, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way to do so is to hit that old like button. Or if you want to see me play games in full, be sure to check out my Stream Archive channel. I'm also live on Twitch most nights Australian time if you ever want to catch me live. Anyway, that's it from me. If you want to see me talk more about the games I play, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Until next time, thanks for watching.